Hi, it's Laura, and it's the 12th of March. It's getting kind of late after 9 o'clock, and I'm just now kind of sitting down and gathering my thoughts, and I wanted to do a video for you. Today, some of the men went to Pastor Sergey's village house to help him split wood this morning. He usually lives in the town nearest us, but he does have an old house here in the village, which they've been living at to kind of stay away from the town, especially when the bombing first started around the area. Mark did not go into the city today, but did go to a bigger village not too far away in order to get metal. We need to create a specific pen for piglets and one of our mama's pens. And he also got some chick feed because our chicks are getting to the point where they are going to start eating. Natasha and Vika helped me with cabbage rolls for the emergency workers, their dinner tonight. We got that cooked up in the oven, and we made a huge pot of some more that'll be cooked up for the center here tomorrow. And making cabbage rolls is an all-day affair. It took us hours with the three of us. It was very nice to have ladies here so we could just sit and chat as we did all that, because I missed that girl time living in a house with all these men. The ladies took care of lunch and did a salad for dinner, so we didn't have to worry about it. Mark had already cooked some chicken this morning. He tends to cook a lot of the meats in the morning when he's making breakfast. It's just more economical for us. After lunch, Pastor Sergey dropped by for a Bible study with the men, and our guests decided to sit in on that. I prepared the rest of the things for the emergency workers and took their dinner to them, among a lot of other things, like checking on the chicks. We have 18 live chicks now in our brooder box. We've lost 3, which is not too uncommon. We have another one that just hatched, and we have another 4 or 5 eggs that are getting ready to hatch. So we knew we'd see a lot of activity today, and we expect to see a lot more activity tomorrow. We stayed home again today just because we realized that we needed to rest. How did we know? Well, we found a hot pad or a pot holder in the refrigerator. I was taking off my short kind of house socks, changing them into my long winter socks when I was getting ready to leave the house, and realized that I had thrown my short socks into the trash can right beside me. I started teaching the men at breakfast this morning, and I was doing it in Russian, and Natasha, who's one of our translators, was sitting there, and finally she said, "Laura, should I translate?" And I'd totally forgot. I was just doing my normal thing. And then later, Mark said a few things, and I translated his English into English for Natasha so she could translate it into Ukrainian. So you have a number of things like that have been happening to us. So, we knew that we just kind of, again, needed to take a day off as much as possible. So, sitting around and making the cabbage rolls and those kind of things is a good way to rest. Let me share some news from just today. It's hard to narrow it down, but I tried to pick out some highlights. At least 120,000 Russians will become unemployed after a lot of Western companies are leaving Russia. And this was put out by Statistica, some research that they had done. Russia has not been able to take the main cities here in Ukraine because the Ukrainian resistance is really, really strong. And that's why Russia is just bombing everything indiscriminately. And this has been noted not just by Ukrainian news, but also the head of the European Diplomacy Organization, Joseph Borrell, and he did an interview today. The mayor in Zhytomyr, Zhytomyr is a state, but they have the capital is also named Zhytomyr. The mayor of that city said on his Facebook page that they received the Starlink from Elon Musk, and they're getting it getting it set up so that it's working. A number of those Starlinks came to Ukraine. The mayor of Kharkov addressed his residents in the city there in a video that I watched, and Natasha kind of helped translate for me. Russia has not taken that city, but again, they're just bombing everything that they can. Over 400 houses have been completely destroyed. He was pleading with the people to leave their houses and go to the bomb shelters. For one thing, a lot of the gas lines have been broken. There's no heating in the houses. Some of them don't have electricity. Just asking that they go to the bomb shelters. And he commended the heroic efforts of the repairmen who are trying to get all these things, all these utilities back up and running. The Ukrainian military shot down a heavy Su-30SM fighter, and it was led by a Russian military colonel, 44-year-old Alexei Kazanov, and the pilot was also part of Russia's Syrian operation. Another pilot was shot down, Krishtop, and he was also involved in the Syrian campaign, and he is dropping bombs here. And he said that since the beginning of the invasion, he's made 3 different flights into Ukraine, and the last one was on March 6th, where he dropped 4 tons of high explosive bombs on a residential neighborhood before his aircraft was shot down. And in a press conference, he made the statement about, while carrying out his combat mission, he realized that the target was not the enemy, Ukrainian military facilities, but residential buildings and civilians, but he fulfilled the criminal order. After the bombings, I was shot down by the Ukrainian Air Force defense units. And after landing, he was taken prisoner by the National Guard of Ukraine. And in the interview, his face looked very angry, and even though he said it was a criminal order, he still followed it. The military leadership of Russia wants to implement the Syrian scenario here in Ukraine, which would mean that they would feel called or allowed or justified to use chemical weapons against civilians in order to win. In addition to that, the Russians have called up 16,000 former Islamic fighters to come and fight against Ukraine. According to some information that was received, Vladimir Putin has ordered the preparation of a terrorist attack on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant is currently controlled by Russian troops, and it's said that they're planning to create a man-made disaster, and then they would place the responsibility or the blame on Ukraine for that. Again, I'm not sure on this one how much backing they have on that. That's just the story that's come out. Melitopol, which is where our graduated client Volodya is from, who's staying with us, more than 2,000 people in that town went to the Russian seized building of the Melitopol Regional State Administration office, and they demanded the release of the mayor of their city, Ivan Fedorov. So first they laid down in the streets, when the Russians came in to block the streets, and now they're marching on this government building saying, "Give us our mayor back." Today, authorities in Kiev stated that there was 12 humanitarian corridors that were organized. Cargoes of food, water, medicine were on the way to a number of these different cities. I'm not going to try and pronounce them all because I'm sure I'm going to get them wrong. But of course, the big issue was Russia going to honor these corridors, these green corridors, which they said they would, but we've seen that they've not kept their word. The Russian army actually shot women and children in the Kiev region today while they were trying to evacuate from the village of Pobeda, which means victory, freedom or victory. And basically 7 people were killed, including 1 child, and they just opened fire on these civilians. The Green Corridor in Mariupol, which is the one of the big ports on the Azov Sea for Ukraine, it was officially announced that this Green Corridor was going to be open. Humanitarian convoys left Zaporozhye for Mariupol. 90 tons of foods and medicine were sent to the city, and they've been blockaded for 13 days now after the Russians took control. Some priests from the Orthodox Church in Zaporozhye went along with it to make sure that it got to the people. There's an estimated 400,000 people, residents living in Mariupol, and that's the same as the city that's closest to us, about 400,000. Still not really seen if it made it in there or not. I haven't seen any reports on that. One of the people up in Kyiv also said that in the coming weeks, Russian troops are going to try and throw all of their reserves into the areas where they can potentially succeed. They give maybe 2, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks on their attempts, after there's going to be kind of like this pause in the attack. And it was kind of interesting. He used a Ukrainian idiom, but he said that after that, they will become like bunnies because they will have nothing to fight with at all, which means that they will have expended all of their reserves, all of their equipment. A lot of it's been lost. And so they're going to be like rabbits, meaning that they are vulnerable prey, which means the Ukraine's going to swarm over them at that point. So it almost sounds like the Ukrainian forces are just kind of letting some of the Russians expend their energy. The Ukrainian forces continued to conduct defensive operations in the south, east, and north, covering the borders of Ukraine and along the seacoast, the Black Sea and the Azov Sea. A popular Russian rapper, his name is Face. Anyway, he spoke out about the war between Russia and Ukraine, and he said, "Me as a Russian artist, now practically I don't exist," which means that he doesn't exist in Russia. He says, "I don't exist as a Russian citizen." He says he's no longer going to pay taxes to Russia. He's left Russia, and he will not come to Russia anymore, and he plans to give no concerts there. And this is kind of a growing trend of some people, famous people in Russia. The scale of Russia's losses testifies to the complete unsuitability of the Russian army, which was a statement made by the former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt. He also said in Washington that he had heard estimates that in 2 weeks about a quarter of all the Russian military equipment during the invasion of Ukraine has been destroyed or disabled. And since the ancient of times, we know from war studies that a military unit with a third of its losses is considered unusable, and it will be lost. They won't win the battle. So it's kind of a good thing. But there was an explosion in the Podil area of Kiev. As a result, a roof of an administrative building caught fire, and it was established that there was an unmanned aerial vehicle that was carrying about 3 kilograms of explosives that the Ukrainian army was able to shoot down, and as it came down, it landed on that roof. They don't know if there's any victims there because it was up on the roof. I saw a picture of the roof burning, and it didn't look like too much damage, but there's obviously going to be looking for victims. The chief of the general staff of the Belarusian army announced that he is dispatching 5 battalion tactical groups to the border of Ukraine to replace the military that's stationed there. But in the very next breath, he denied that this is part of the preparations for entering the war against Ukraine, fighting along with Russia. Kind of doublespeak there. The Ukrainian armed forces liberated 2 settlements in the Chernihiv district, and they took 10 pieces of enemy equipment. And they didn't give the enemy an opportunity to establish a pontoon crossing across one of the rivers, and they've restrained them from advancing more toward Kiev. So they kind of came down on the east side trying to get to Kiev, and they couldn't, and now they've crossed over to the river, and they're trying to come here on the west side, and they're not able to do it. Ukraine's holding them back. Of course, Russian troops are continuing to carry out missile and bomb strikes on very critical infrastructure facilities, residential areas, and airfields all across Ukraine, and they seem to be hitting further and further west now. But overall, it looks like Ukraine is winning this war, that Russia is throwing all of its resources here, and it's not helping. And I think it's a big surprise to Russia in itself, and a number of Ukrainians feel like it's a big surprise to America that the administration in America did not believe that Ukraine could stand up to Russia. But they are, and they're doing an awesome job of it. So that's just kind of the highlights in the news. Please keep us in prayer that we can get some good rest. We can continue serving the people here. We've started up a Gofundme campaign, so you're going to see that on our different social media. Again, just to give people a little bit more directed focus on how to help us. I know some people don't want to use GoFundMe, but after a lot of discussion and prayer, we decided to go ahead and use that for the moment. Please feel free to share that link with anybody. Pray for the Ukrainian soldiers as they continue to fight, that they have the courage and the boldness, but that they don't take unnecessary risks. Pray for the chaplains. A lot of the chaplains that I know enlisted in the military to fight along with the soldiers, but also to minister to them. And there's a number of the chaplains that are still ministering to the military, even though they didn't join the military. And pray for the different pastors around the country who are dealing with people who are very much afraid and scared of what the outcome is going to be. So just that they would listen to the Lord's leading and that they would comfort these people. Pray for our pastor, Pastor Sergey, as he does that with the people in our church. We're having church at our house tomorrow here in the village because the culture club was extremely cold, freezing cold. And so we want it to be a little bit more comfortable for all of us. So just pray for the guests that are going to be coming to our house tomorrow, and that we can, have a good fellowship with them and just be natural and comfortable with them, and that, they understand that it's not some sort of cult like what many people believe here if you're not Orthodox. Just pray for our men as we continue to teach and lead them, that God would work in their hearts, and that as we teach them, that the truth of God's Word would work its way into their lives and give them good roots and foundation in God's Word, and that they would give their lives to Christ. And we're planning a baptism for one of our guys who accepted Christ a couple weeks ago. So just keep those things in prayer if you would. So good night.